All right, got time for us to start. We are recording. Want you to remember Micah chapter 4. We're in chapter 5, I understand that, but the chapter 4, that first couple of verses there in chapter 4, in Micah chapter 4, 1 and 2, maybe first 4 verses that are the same thing as Isaiah 2. I think they're your memory verses also. And so need to remember that, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Messiah, and chapter 5 is going to deal some more with the Messiah as we start then in this book. This is then he's going to talk about some of the promises in this last section, chapters 5, 6, and 7. There are some promises that we're going to notice also as we go throughout this, about these last 3 chapters. All right, in chapter 5 and verse 1, he starts out with the word now. And if you look in your Bible at chapter 4, verse 9, he says now, and then chapter 4 and verse 11, he says now, and chapter 5 and verse 1, he says now. So here is then some significance with this and what they are to do. So he's really beginning an oracle or a message then with these in these 3 points. And he is saying here, gather thy troops. And here is then the figurative of calling the troops. And it is in the imperative, so that means this is a command. The figure then means that that they are to gather the Zion, the city, Jerusalem then, would be under attack. And the troops then, also the word troops, means that it's a band of raiders. And the term also was used in Jeremiah 18:22. Okay, so Jerusalem is under attack. Then there is a siege against us. And this term siege then is used, especially the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. And then another condition that would befall Israel. Am I going too fast?
No, say that again. I'm caught up.
Okay. Another condition that would befall Israel is that the rod shall be smitten upon the jaw of Israel, or the cheek of Israel. The enemy would humiliate the judges or the rulers of Israel. And this is talking about then the shameful contrast with the judges and those who smashed the enemies which came against Israel.
Repeat that last sentence, please.
All right, there's a contrast then with the judges, like in the book of Judges.
Okay.
Of the past who smashed the enemies who came against Israel. All right, it's irony also that the one who should smite evildoers with a scepter is himself smitten by the rod. All right, and here is then the condition of Jerusalem, and that is it's in the deepest degradation
Degradation.
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 Yeah, degradation. Yeah.
Okay, say that again. A condition of Israel or Jerusalem?
Jerusalem
Is what?
is this deepest degradation
Okay.
before the Messiah would come.
Okay.
All right, now verse 2, we're going to talk about this coming ruler. And it talks about where he would be born. He was going to be the liberator of God's people from the oppressor.
Okay.
We're talking about the place then, the purpose, and the significance. Or we're going to talk about three things: the place, the purpose, and the significance of the birth of this ruler. All right. So first of all, let's talk about the place of his birth. It's going to be in Bethlehem of Ephrathah. This name Ephrathah is fruitful.
Is that what it means?
And it's added to Bethlehem, which is the house of bread.
Hang on. And it's fruitful, the last one.
Ephrathah is, yes.
Okay, got it.
Bethlehem is the house of bread. Okay.
Yeah.
So now the reason it's distinguished this way is because there are other towns named Bethlehem.
Okay.
One is in the same name in the region of Zebulun.
Okay.
All right, Bethlehem also is used with a masculine pronoun. And it's in contrast with the daughter of Zebulun, or the daughter of Zion, excuse me.
Daughter of Zion?
Mm-hmm. He has the daughter of thy troops in verse, if you're looking at the King James. That would be feminine.
Verse 1?
Yeah, that would be feminine. So here is, then this is in contrast to that.
Okay.
All right. Also, we find that the smallness of Bethlehem is mentioned and is addressed. Because he says that thou will be little among the thousands of Judah. But when we look, then Bethlehem is not even named among the more than 100 cities that are allotted to the tribe of Judah in Joshua chapter 15.
Bethlehem's not mentioned in the cities given to Judah.
Oh, that's right. Now there's some, I think I get into the significance of this. We're going to talk about the significance of it, aren't we? Yes. Okay.
That's next.
No, we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the purpose of his birth.
Okay, good.
Um,
It's all talking about Christ. Right?
Yes, it is. This is talking about Christ. All right. Now, still in verse number 2, it talks about he shall go forth to be a ruler in Israel. So here is then the glorious ruler would come out of, and we could say again would come out, because David was born in Bethlehem.
Right.
This is why Joseph and Mary had to go to to Bethlehem
The city.
because of the taxation. There is some ideas when we can get lost that, and some people are confused about it, about Jerusalem and Bethlehem, because they think that Jerusalem is the city of David, and Bethlehem is his birthplace, and that's why they had to be there. And we're going to talk about that more on the significance of this. We need to bring in some things here too. We may do it here. The purpose of his birth. Okay. And when we talk about this word that is used here, is not really talking about his birth, but it shows a point then in this direction, but it points in this direction. The word strictly speaking here, I mean, if we look at the literal words that are used here, it's not talking about a birth, but the context then. And that's how we get to the point that was talking about his birth. In Matthew chapter 2, okay, when it was asked then, Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, and when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And when they said unto him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, and they quote this passage, and thou Bethlehem in the land of Judah art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor, and he shall rule my people Israel. So they quote this, and they understood it as the birth. So the context of this then led them to believe, and also would indicate that that's what the meaning.
Being born.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah. The belief was even during the first century was that Christ would be born, the Messiah. The Messiah would be born in Bethlehem then of Judah. In John chapter 7 and verse 42, hath not the scripture said that Christ cometh out of the seed of David, out of the town of Bethlehem, where David was? Okay, so that's also then the purpose of his birth, but the significance, we're going to talk about that a little bit more because there's more significance to it. So Bethlehem is also referred to the masculine pronoun. I think I mentioned that. All right, but it's in regard to the father of the coming ruler. So they're considering Bethlehem then to be the father of this. And then this Messiah or the Christ would come forth from Bethlehem for me, that is for God. And God would provide himself a king among the sons of Jesse. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. And so here's his then doing this again through David then. And this time it would be for his redemptive purposes. So Bethlehem's ruler would be devoted to the will of the Lord. And that's what Jesus said, I came not to do my own will, but the will of him that sent me. He would belong to the Lord, and he would be ruler over Israel. And his authority would be over all, which use that term Israel. Now, understand that we're talking about Israel. We're talking about spiritual Israel. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 16. Romans 2, 28 and 29.
Galatians 6, what?
16.
And
Romans 2, 28 and 29.
So that's from the church.
Yes, I think so. So he is the ruler then. Ephesians chapter 1, 22, 20, he is the head then.
Head of the kingdom.
All right.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay.
That comes from my daily Bible reading. When Christ said, I will not eat with you or take this with you until I eat it with you in the kingdom.
Anew in the kingdom, I think.
In the kingdom. Okay, and when he comes back, he's resurrected and he's on the earth yet still. He hasn't ascended to the Father. And he asked them for something to eat in Luke. And he eats with them.
Yes.
So would that point out that was the time of the kingdom? Okay.
Kingdom.
He couldn't use that to say it's the kingdom has come.
That's right. Because the kingdom hadn't come then.
Because he hadn't established it on day of Pentecost.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wouldn't use that in an error.
Yeah. See, he would eat with them. That's when you go to Matthew chapter 18, where 2 or 3 are gathered. I will be in the midst of you. Right. So when the church gathers, then Christ is there and he's eating and he's drinking that Lord's Supper with us in a spiritual way. Yeah. Okay. And the church then wasn't established Acts chapter 2, and that's before then. That's in that 50 days.
So he's talking, when he says that he will eat that in the kingdom, he's talking about after his ascension.
That's right.
And the church has been established and we're having our Lord's Supper every first day of the week.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
That's not talking about a regular.
Okay, a regular meal that he was having with his disciples.
Right. That's talking about the Lord's Supper. All right, now the significance of his birth. Here is then the Bethlehem ruler, or the one that it's mentioned here in also is one who has a prior existence. So when we talk about the prior existence, we're talking about the angel of God, as seen in some of the old, we go back to the book of Genesis and we talked about that.
Yeah, when the men came to Abraham.
That's right.
And one stayed, and that was the angel of God.
Yes.
He called him Lord. Okay.
Now, in John chapter 8, in verse 58, Jesus does not hesitate to say there, and I think that's before Abraham was, I am. I believe that's correct.
Yes, that's fairly
and so he's not denying that he existed before then too. So when we look at this prophecy then, it does not merely assert that this ruler came forth from heaven, but that he had been actively involved in leadership of his people in the distant past. So he was a leader. He will be a leader when he's born, and he has been a leader in the distant past. So here is his his continuing existence.
His omniscience.
Does
that mean always is, always was, Alpha and Omega?
Omnipresence. The terms from of old means from the Ancient of Days and are used of the patriarchal age. So here is then even, and also it's used eternity prior to creation. So here is this ruler then being from of old. And then he had gone through many times. He had led the children of Israel. All right. Then we're still talking about the significance of it in verse number 3, I think it is. All right, first part of 3. They give them up therefore he will give them up. And it is used in other places, and it's talking about the surrender of Israel unto the power of her enemies as a punishment for sin. So God would give his people over to the power of their enemies. But that would be temporary. Until this ruler would be born. Isaiah 7:14, he would be born of a virgin. So this is also, this birth would signal the beginning of the end of the nation's oppression.
Now, signal the beginning or the end?
Both of them.
Okay.
Signal the beginning of the end. So this is signaling the end of really the Jewish nation, Israel.
Okay, signal the beginning of the end of Jewish nation.
Of the nation's oppression. Okay, because they're going to be done away with. I understand he's using some terminology here that, okay, yes, they're going to be. The Jews have always been oppressed.
Right.
Okay, but it's going to end because God's Israel then has changed. And we talked about that in those two passages. So it has been changed, and therefore, because of that, then we've got to look at how this is considered in this. So it was the end of the nation's oppression. Here would the church then be established. Okay. And the freedom that's in the church. All right, in chapter 5:3, the rest of chapter 3, and continuing on through the first part of chapter 5:5, all right, there would be a numerous blessings then following the birth of the Messiah. The first blessing is that of the return. He uses, and then shall the remnant of his brethren return to the children of Israel. So the returnees consist of the sons of Israel. So they were the first to receive the blessings of the Messiah's coming. They were the ones who Christ went to, who was first preached. You understand that they went, in Acts chapter 1, they are to begin at Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then the uttermost parts of the earth. So when we talk about then Acts chapter 1 through chapter 12, it's mostly to the Jews, although we find 10 and 11, the Cornelius there and coming in. But the Gentiles coming in, Christians were called Christian. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch in Acts chapter 11. And then really it starts on a wholesale basis, then going into all the world in Acts chapter 13. That's the missionary journeys. But, it was still, Paul said, I go to the Jews first and then to the Greeks or the Gentiles. So Jews had the first chance at it in many, many places. And he tells them, sometimes seeing ye have judged yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, lo, we turn to the Gentiles. So they were the first. Then the remnant of those brethren must be then the Gentiles. Other sheep have I which are not of this fold. Okay. Number 2.
Okay.
All right. He would stand and shepherd. So here is this shepherd then, and what it involves. And in this area over there, it is the idea of kingship. David was taken from the flock to care for God's people. And Jesus is used then. He says, I am the shepherd. I am the good shepherd. John chapter 10. And then Peter calls him the chief shepherd in 1 Peter chapter 5. Number 3, we find that the ruler would be endowed with strength from God and is worthy of his throne. This ruler is not subject to human weakness.
So the leader was indeed with strength from God.
Mm-hmm.
He is worthy of the throne.
That's right.
And what else did you say?
He's not subject to human weakness like we are. One time they asked Jesus about eating, and he says, I have meat to eat which ye know not of. Okay. All right, number 4. The ruler then reflects the majesty of the name of God. He would have the same glory which God had, but he would be manifested on earth. He is the mighty God of Isaiah 9 and verse 5. Right, number 5. All right. The ruler's authority is delegated to him by his God. While Jesus had a human mother, okay, he still called God his God. Ownership. Okay, listen to what people say. You know, you people down there, you people over there, or whatever. You know, and people say us. Well, this is his God. Notice in the Old Testament, a lot of times when they talk about your God or my God, that's what they have some reference to. So this is his God then. He was subordinate to the Father.
When he was on earth.
While he was on earth.
But not now.
No, I don't think so. All right, number 6. This king would provide security and stability for God's people. They will dwell in safety. The original promise to David was that under his descendants, Israel would never again be oppressed by wicked people. 2 Samuel 7:10. So we find them oppressed under the Old Testament. So this has to be something then that would happen under the Messiah's reign.
2 Samuel
7:10.
And you said it was under what?
Is not under we see them oppressed by other nations after David's reign. So this has to have reference then to the Messianic kingdom. We have security. All right, number 7. His kingdom is universal. Let's see. The great ends of the earth. So it's talking about then the entire world. And now shall be, and so the now is also introduces then the contrast between former times and then when this prophecy would take place.
And say that again, I'm sorry.
The term now in verse 3 also mentions the contrast between the former times and then the view under the Messianic kingdom. He would be known and feared in the very ends of the earth. And I think that then is also the indication of the church go into all the world to preach the gospel. Mark 16, 15 and 16. Matthew chapter 28, 18 through 20. Number 8. Verse 5 of chapter 5, it says, and this man shall be the peace. So here is then a hope of deliverance. Peace or shalom. It's
Spell shalom.
SHALOM.
Just like it seems. Okay.
Is salvation in its comprehensive sense. It involves deliverance from, danger, and then it gives security and prosperity. It would be like Solomon, who brought peace to the ancient Israel. 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 24. All right. Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 through 9. He's the Prince of Peace also.
Isaiah what?
11, 6 through 9. He gives, here's the everlasting Father, gives several attributes of what he would be. Okay. So the Apostle Paul then in Ephesians chapter 2, and it talks about broken down the middle wall of partition that was between us, taking out of the way and nailing it to the cross. So sees this as the unification then of the Jews and the Gentiles. All right. Now let's talk about the victory in verses 5 through 15, the rest of 5 through verse 15. So here is the victory then. Now he's going to bring peace to the people in 4 ways.
Okay.
Number 1, by defending Israel against external attacks.
Okay.
Number 2, by empowering his people to overcome the enemy.
Right.
Number 3, by destroying all the false supports upon which people tend to lean.
Okay.
Number 4, by executing vengeance upon those who refuse to be converted. So let's talk about this for a minute now, these 10 verses. All right. Now, under this, we're going to break it down. We're going to talk about the defense of Zion in chapter 5, verse 5 and 6. Okay. Now, he's going to mention in this about Assyria. Okay. And Assyria then is going to stand, it's going to symbolize or stand for the hostile forces. Which it might attack Messianic kingdom. All right, now if you'll look in your Bible and you'll see that he's going to set up 7 shepherds and 8 principal men.
Yeah.
Okay, these spiritual leaders function as subordinates of the chief shepherd. Seven is a complete number.
Okay.
And it points to the completed work of God. 8 would mean more than enough. And he talks about the principal men, literally those anointed or appointed or installed from among men. So here is the Messiah then selecting men who will assist him in shepherding the flock.
Would that be the apostles or the elders?
I think both of them are implied in this.
Okay.
Because, and that may be the 7 may be the apostles, while the 8 then refers to the elders. And not necessarily a specific number on what, and you understand that because there were 12 apostles, or well, there were more than 12 apostles, but those, yeah, you understand. Yeah, it was complete.
There will be no more.
That's right. That's right.
But elders, there will be, as time moves on.
That's right. And they are called shepherds. So, okay, so the shepherds appointed then, they shepherd or they rule the land of Assyria with a sword. And I think Assyria, and then he talks about Nimrod. And Nimrod was the forerunner. It was the first empire of Mesopotamia. And so they would rule over them. I think it's talking about this. Nimrod, the shepherds would rule over this.
Over Nimrod?
Yes. So the use of his name suggests the nature of his kingdom. It was a anti-God type kingdom.
Nimrod.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the missionary activity of the church is seen in this. Conquering. Military conquest of enemy territory. All right, but there's still those who will be persist in hostility to the kingdom of God. And these hostile kingdoms are called Assyria and the land of Nimrod here.
So they're enemies of the Messianic kingdom?
Yes, both of these are.
Oh, that's what they're representing?
Yes. So notice also it says in verse number 6 that he cometh into our land and he treadeth within the borders of the remnant of Jacob. Let's see. Yeah, I wanted that verse 6 there. The last part of verse 6. He says, and he delivered us from the Assyrians when he cometh into our land and when he treadeth within our borders. That last part maybe has reference to where Jesus said that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.
Okay. That's Matthew 16:18.
Yep, that's right. Matthew 16:18. All right. The second point under the victory, okay?
That was the first one?
Yep. I thought that's what I told you. Talked about the victory, right?
Yes.
I gave you the
yes.
victory. All right.
Yeah, the victory in that 5 and 6 was all this. Okay, now
Yeah.
we're going to point number 2.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is called the empowerment of Zion.
Oh.
A was the defense of Zion.
Yeah.
Okay, this is called the empowerment of Zion.
Okay.
And this is going through 7 through 9. And he's going to talk about the remnant of Jacob. Okay, this is the saved. the redeemed, those who embrace the Messiah. And it says then it should be in the midst of many people. And this is then the spread of the world. The message would spread out into the world. And he gives two illustrations under this. One is the refreshing dew. Okay. So this is like the dew or the showers from heaven on the barren hearts of the heathen. And the background of this is in Genesis 13 or Genesis 12. Bless them that bless you.
Genesis 12.
1 through 3.
Okay.
All right.
What's the second one?
The rending lion.
The what?
He talks about the showers of the terreth not for the man and waiteth not for the sons of men. The remnant of Jacob should be among the Gentiles as the midst of the people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest. So this is the lion then. Verses 8 and 9. So here they would be refreshed, okay, but they would not be feeble. Be one of invincible power. So here is a relationship between then the people of God and the nations would be like between a powerful lion and the weaker domestic animals.
And this is equal to Israel and the rest of the world?
Yes.
Okay.
Now you were talking about spiritual Israel now. We're not talking about physical. We're talking about spiritual Israel.
I meant that. Spiritual Israel and the rest of
Okay, now this is also Genesis 12, verse 3, but he's, where he says, I will bless them that bless thee, and I will curse them that curse thee. So this is then that idea of the
blessings and curses.
That's right. Oh, let's see. And so those who attempt to overcome the church will be crushed. Believers are more than conquerors. Romans chapter 8, 33 through 39. Then he says in verse number 9, thy hand should be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. A hand is said to be high when mighty deeds are being done and the foe is being vanquished. So before peace, you've got to deal with those that Opposed? All right, let's take a little break.
Good. Look and see about moss.
They're probably right there.
No, they're right there.
Okay.
But we also have one of those swoosher things, but there's no refills.
There's a mop bucket back there.
Oh, yeah. And you probably need to do it since it's somewhere right here. No, those orange scissors that are in the kitchen, they're either or scissor.
Mm-hmm. I don't like them
You don't like them?
because they're both equal and
What kind of sharp?
no, they don't feel comfortable in my hand.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Fine to me. What time are you gonna start back?
Yeah.
If you're gonna put a pole in the middle of that 18 feet, making it 9, how are you going to attach 4-foot wide pieces of siding? Are you gonna run a board this way, maybe a couple of them like that, so you can attach it at the bottom and then at the top? Okay, yeah. We'll just get 10-foot boards.
Mm-hmm. You're gonna put some in the middle too.
Yeah.
See, what I was gonna do is just, since it's 8 foot, just put me a board across the top and board across the top, and then put every 16 feet, put me,
Every 16 inches.
yeah, 16 inches, and then do me like that. Boom.
That sounds good. Sounds good. There's not that much difference in the cost of pressure treated and regular wood.
Understand.
50 pennies.
Understand. We'll do pressure treated out there.
Yeah, very much so. Now, what we might want to do before you get started is scrape your line on the ground
Mm-hmm.
all the way and put something down, maybe flashing or something, just to keep the grass from growing.
It's not going to grow because then can get. It might start, but it's not going to last long because there's not going to be sunlight.
The weeds.
Yeah.
But you could scrape it still.
Yeah.
It's just dirt right now, right? And we could just, we could put into that cream down.
Yeah. Roundup.
Plants get some of that stuff Georgia Power uses. Kills it for 50 years. That's what they say.
Or there's some of that black paper out there we could put. Black paper tear too.
It'll tear, and the storms will tear it up, and the cats and dogs will tear it up. We could buy some bags of gravel. Just some Quikrete on top of it, wet it down. It's solid.
I got Quikrete out there.
Yeah. You used to be able to get, no, this is 1,000 years ago. You used to be able to go to Cornell Young and get down in industrial Macon and get a truckload of even river rock, which is decorative, if you wanted it that way, for $15.
You ready to start back?
Yeah.
We can stop early. Okay, we're going to start back. All right. Now, this is point number 3. We're going to talk about point number 3, okay? We had the defense under the victory. That was our big title, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We had the defense of Zion. And we had the empowerment of Zion, okay? And this is going to be called the destruction of the props.
Destruction of the
props.
Okay.
Props. And this is going to be the destruction then of the political and religious props that ancient Judah leaned for support.
Political, what kind of props?
And religious props. All right, in 5:10, it talks about it's going to destroy the horses and the chariots. And they weren't supposed to have horses and chariots. They were supposed to mutilate the horses so they could no longer be war horses and be used for war when they went conquered a nation. And that Israel got where they then had these, and God's going to remove them. But also in the Messianic day, the kingdom would not be spread through conventional instruments of war. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Where is that?
Luke, I think. Maybe John. I think it's John. Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 4, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal.
2 Corinthians 1.
10:4, but mighty through the pulling down of strongholds.
John 18:36 is my kingdom is not of this
Yeah,
world.
okay. John 18:36. All right. He talks about the cut off then, the horses out of the midst of thee. That cut off then is used in the law of Moses to refer to the removal of persons who violated the holiness of Israel. By cutting off then these offenders, God would bring pressure on the entire nation to shun that which is offensive to his holiness.
Say that again.
By cutting off the offenders, God would bring pressure on the entire nation to shun that which is offensive to his holiness. All right. So we've talked about horses and chariots. Now we're going to talk about cities and strongholds. In verse 11. The people would need no protection from walled cities. All right, next, verse 12. Well, he has it as sorcerers and soothsayers, and King James has witchcrafts and soothsayers. Okay. So this is people who use divination. And again, those were to be extricated from the
It would be cut off.
kingdom, yes. And Saul had done that except for the witch in Endor.
Now you're saying Saul had done that. He cut them off,
Yes,
except
for
then
that.
he used the witch of Endor.
That's right. And that's why she was afraid.
Okay.
All right. So once this Messiah appeared, there would be no need or desire to have anything to do which offends God.
Okay, once the Messiah appears, no need
To be
to desire anything.
or be involved with anything which offends God. All right. And then in verses 13 and 14, this is talking about idolatrous paraphernalia. There's the graven images, standing images, groves, and that type of thing.
You saying groves?
Yeah, groves, which would be a place that they would, a grove, and they'd plant that and set that apart for these gods.
Okay.
And they would put up the pillars and that type of thing during this days. The worship of God of the Bible is to have no images. Okay, Exodus chapter 20, verse, thou shalt have, none of these things. But yet we find them used throughout the Old Testament. They're called the work of men's hands. All right, so the point is that when the Messiah comes, that spiritual Israel would no longer have a desire to worship anything made by man. Their allegiance would be completely devoted to the Lord. All right, now, a lot of times the Old Testament talks about the Asherim, Asherim. Asherim.
Okay.
All right, this is the female side of the Ashtoreth. Asherah.
Say that again.
Asherah.
Okay.
And this then is under Baal, Baal.
So it's one of the fake gods.
Yes.
The goddesses. This is a goddess one.
Yeah. Now she would, they would make this astrum out of a wooden post or a tree.
Like a totem pole. Kind of, sort of.
Yes. She would be the female deity. And she would be planted in the ground. So that's why he says you plucked up. They would be uprooted and plucked up.
Is that part of the thing in Jeremiah about not worshiping a tree? Could it be the same sort of idea?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You'll find that when he talks about the groves and he talks about Baal and he talks about those in the Old Testament, that's what it has reference to, not just Jeremiah, but when you talk about, well, they'd be in First and Second Kings and those type of things. Well, it'd be after Solomon. Mm-hmm. They'd set up these groves. Israel was bad about having these groves. Hezekiah destroyed many of them.
And what are they exactly? Are they like we have pecan groves? Are they like that?
Yes, it would be.
But it would be in honor of the
deity.
Deity.
Yes.
A fake deity.
Yes.
Because God doesn't need anything like that.
No.
Since He made it.
No. All God wanted was the tabernacle, a place to worship. Okay. All right. In the last part then of 14b, he talks about I will destroy the cities. So he's going to destroy these cities as a defensive fortress. These cities would be destroyed as centers of idolatry. All right, then in verse 15, we're going to talk about the vengeance on the enemy. This is going to be the other point under the victory. The last point would be fourth point, I think, under the victory. Verse 15, I will execute vengeance then as anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they know. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verses 7 through 9.
Vengeance on them that know not God or obey not the gospel.
That's right. All right. Vengeance is a legal term for actions of a I looked that word up, and it has to do with anonymity.
Animosity.
Yeah, but it's Suzeran, Zeran, Royal Zeran, which is talking about a autonomous ruler. What you looking at?
Vengeance. It's revenge, retribution, retaliation, payback, reprisals.
But this is a legal term that he's talking about him against rebels who do not acknowledge God's sovereignty. All right. So here is then the exercise of God's sovereignty in the form of punishment, and it's going to occur and it's going to be maintained because of the hostile humanity.
Say it again, because you kind of tumble.
Yeah,
exercise of God's sovereignty.
In punishment.
Okay.
Because God's rule needs to be maintained in the midst of human hostility or hostile humanity. All right, now notice it's going to be executed in anger and fury. But this is not irrational anger. But is measured, appropriate, and just. So really these are anthropomorphisms, human attributes applied to God.
Okay.
All right. So, complete enjoyment of God's peace. Complete enjoyment of God's peace can only take place when God deals finally and conclusively with the wicked.
Complete enjoyment of God's peace can only
take place.
when God deals with the wicked.
And finally and conclusively deals with wicked. So God is sovereign over all nations, whether they realize it or not. Okay. Let's see. All right. Now, as they witness the great acts of salvation, these wicked nations should give heed to the claims and demands of God. And if they don't submit to God's sovereignty by acknowledging his Son, he will take vengeance.
They don't admit to God's sovereignty by acknowledging his Son.
Yep, it's going to take vengeance. All right, chapter 6. All right, now this section that we're going to deal with is going to go from 6:1 to 7:6. All right, and what he's going to do now, he's going to turn his attention then to Judah. And he's going to plead for repentance on their part. And he's going to point out what God wants for them to do to be saved. Now, understand, their plan of salvation is different from ours because they're under the Old Testament. But the basics is still the same. What does God require of thee? All right. When God speaks, the highest duty of mankind is to listen. Now, our first point is he's going to open the court. This is going to be a courtroom situation. And we know that because of some of the words that's going to be used. We'll get into that. That'll be verses 1 and 2. He uses the word arise and contend. Arise, contend thou before the mountains, and let the hills hear before thy voice. So arise then in the presence of God. And here is God's case against the people. And the contending there is a technical word, and it's signal of preparation for speech.
Say that again.
The word contend,
Yeah.
all right, is a technical term. Preparation for speech, especially in the context of a court. Now understand the mountains here that he's using as an illustration in the hills. It's kind of unclear what he's talking about. It could be one of three things. It could be the judges, the witness, or the accused. Most likely they are witnesses against Judah. Because these mountains witness the original covenant between God and his people. They witness the faithfulness of God towards his people. And they witness the faithlessness of the people towards God. If these witnesses then could bear testimony, they would seal the doom of Judah. All right. Now he tells them in verse 2, he talks about these mountains in verse 2, and mountains, the Lord's controversy, your strong foundations, the earth, and the Lord has a controversy with his people. And he will plead then his so the mountains, they stood where God had stationed them at the foundations of the earth. And they were the ones who heard that God had a legal case against his people. All right, controversy in verse 2 is it means that there is controversy between the two parties. And we need to find out which party is right. And refers to them as his people. So this is a special covenant litigation. All right. And also verse 2, it talks about plead. And this is to bring charges against them. And it also talks about then, this word means one who upholds what is right.
Which does? What word?
This word that we're talking about, plead.
Okay, say it again.
It stands for the one who upholds what is right. That would be God, of course. So now God's going to ask some questions. Look at verse 3. What have I done to deserve your neglect? And he's ready to hear any credible evidence against him if Judah can produce such. So the tone here is one of a wounded spouse or parent. It's much like John chapter 8 and verse 46. Which of you convicts me of sin?
8 and 46.
Mm-hmm. Second question then. How have I wearied you? Verse 3. The word wearied suggests to weary the patience of a person by demands of too great severity. Or by failing to perform one's promises.
Failing to what? One's promises?
Perform one's promises. People can become so beaten down that they lose hope. So maybe by what's taking place, but the attack of Assyria and those type of things, they were discouraged.
It discouraged them, or it will discourage them?
No, they were discouraged. They were exhausted. And they blamed God for their condition. They didn't blame themselves, they blamed God. And then he says there in the last part of verse 3, testify against me. Okay? Produce evidence to support your grievance. Had God deserted them, or had they deserted God? So the people had departed from the Lord in attitude and action and did not even know it. They were weary with the demands of true faith. So God's going to present his case, verses 4 and 5. This is the next point. He's calling on them to remember. He does say that in verse 5, but if you go back and look at verse 4, it's talking about some things that they need to remember too. All right, so what we're remembering then is reflection of God's saving activity. They should have had gratitude. Israel should have had gratitude toward God. God does not want Israel to live in the past. But he wants them to remember what he's done for them. And that will help them with the future. All right, 4 acts are mentioned here. 4 events or 4 acts, okay? Number 1, the Exodus. All right, now, here's, this is the center. Exodus is really what God had done during the Exodus is really kind of like the death, the burial, and the resurrection in the New Testament, okay? To remember all that took place then. They left Exodus, what God did to Egypt, what God had done for them, and they crossed on the Red Sea, all of this, the whole book of Exodus then. All right, now he says, I brought thee out of the land of Egypt. This word brought up, and now I'm not familiar with the Hebrew and how it sounds, but the word brought up and the verb wearied sound very similar. So here's a play on words. God's grace and the ingratitude of the people. All right, he says, I redeemed thee out of the house of servants. Okay, redeemed means to free someone who is in bondage. Okay. No redemption price, however, is paid, but here is the manifestation of God's grace and power. Second illustration.
What was the first one?
Exodus.
Okay, Exodus. Okay. Gotcha.
Number 2 is wilderness leadership. Now he mentions, of course, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. They were not left leaderless. Now the ancient Targum, Targum, on this passage suggests that Moses taught them law. Aaron showed them the way of atonement. And Miriam taught the women. All right, number 3. That's how we want to say this. Okay. All right. Balak. This is Numbers 22 through 24. Now he sent for Balaam and he wanted him to curse the people. But Balaam said, I can only tell you what God says. And he blessed the people instead of cursing the people. All right. So this is one of God's saving acts also. Number 4. Is the entrance into Canaan. And this is the latter part of 5. From Shittim and then into Gilgal.
From what?
Shittim.
Okay.
All right. To Gilgal.
All right. Okay.
So this is the entrance then into the land of promise. Shittim was the last encampment before crossing Jordan. And they should recall the grace of God extended to the sinful people. All right, Gilgal then was the first encampment in Canaan.
Wait a minute, you said in Shittim, though, that should remember the grace of God.
Extended to a sinful people.
Okay, Gilgal was the first on the other side.
Yes, first encampment in Canaan. And this was the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Okay.
All right, now the purpose of these things of remembering was to notice in verse 5, the latter part, that you may know the righteousness of the Lord. Here's God's faithfulness to the ancient promises. So by remembering these deeds, they would know God's identity. God had not wronged his people in any way. God is vindicated before the court. So the defendants now are going to ask some questions. They ask for a question and get increasingly sarcastic in their questions. Right, question number 1. With what shall I come before God? Bow myself to God on high. The question presupposes that one must come before God with something. The question also presupposes that God is the problem. Something must be done to change his attitude toward Judah. It's not my fault, it's God's fault.
Sounds like today, then.
Yep. And they thought they could actually bribe God with gifts and change his attitude towards them. So this is really setting the stage for verse 8. They at least realize that they must bow before God. And that God is a high God. It means he's on a higher level. Okay. He's in heaven. God hears, heals, and helps those who come before him in a proper spirit. Creatures of the earth must humble themselves before him. The problem was that the people of the 8th century defined humility in terms of sacrificial ritual.
8th century.
Yes. That's talking about when Micah prophesied.
8th
Uh-huh.
century?
750 years before Christ.
Oh, 8th century BC.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking 800s, you know?
No.
Okay, say that again. Sorry.
The problem was that the people of the 8th century BC, they defined humility in terms of sacrificial ritual rather than daily righteousness. The problem was that the people of the 8th century BC defined humility in terms of sacrificial ritual rather than daily righteousness.
Sacrificial. I don't know why I can't remember. I'm tired, I guess.
Ritual
Ritual.
rather than daily righteousness. All right. Humility before God requires obedience to his word. Without that obedience, humility is a sham. And I think we'll stop right there for this evening.
Here's my hand.
We'll get to the second question. Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll see you next week, Lord willing.